Lake Forest Plan Commission. I'm Rosemary Kerr, Chairman of the Commission, and at this time, I would like to ask members of the Commission to introduce themselves, beginning with Commissioner Dixon.
John Dixon.
Michael Freeman.
Monica Artman-Ruggles.
Jamie Moorhead.
And from City staff, Ms. Cerniak is here tonight to present the staff report. Our first item of business, I'm going to ask that we postpone this to the next meeting, consideration of the minutes from the November 14, 2019 Plan Commission meeting. They were fairly lengthy and it took a bit of time to get them prepared, so I don't believe all of us have had the opportunity to review them yet.
I'll second that motion.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Motion is passed. Our next agenda item is public hearing and action for consideration of a request for a recommendation in support of approval of the final plat of subdivision for the Margaret M. and Hampton M. Swift Memorial Subdivision plat. The tentative plat for this subdivision was previously approved by this commission. The final plat is consistent with the prior approval and is presented for final review by the commission as required by the code. Property owner is Washington, Michigan LLC, care of Stuart Swift, and city staff will be the presenter the evening. Before the presentation, are there any declaration of conflicts of interest or ex parte contacts on behalf of the commission members?
No.
No. Then I would ask staff to please present the petition at this point.
Thank you, Chairman Kerr, members of the Commission. In September of this year, you saw the tentative proposal for subdivision of the Swift property located on Walnut, Washington Road, and Westminster, that kind of a triangle area. You had considered this at an earlier meeting as well. As you know, the substantive aspects of any petition are considered either through the conceptual phase, preliminary phase, or at the tentative phase. Consistent with the code, and before this is presented to the City Council for final approval, which will occur through an ordinance and a special use permit, because this is a planned preservation development, the code does require that we once more return the final plat to the Commission for a final sign-off, for a final recommendation to the council. In this case, you have a 4-lot subdivision. The property is zoned R3. The lots are all in conformance with all provisions of the code. In fact, the lots exceed some of the provisions of the code. The lots exceed the 40,000 square foot size requirement. The front setbacks on lots 2 and 3 exceed the required 40-foot setback. That resulted from your discussion and neighborhood input about preserving the streetscape. The conditions speak to preserving 3 significant groupings of trees by carefully considering driveway locations. With respect to driveway locations, the plat both establishes some limitations on driveways and also provides some additional flexibility with respect to one of the lots, which allows the driveway to encroach a bit closer to the side yard line. The city engineer has completed the review of the engineering plans. The subdivision plat before you is in full conformance with your tentative approval and full conformance with the city code. If you choose to do so, it will be appropriate to recommend to the City Council final approval of the plat of subdivision and approval of the ordinance and the associated special use permit. I would be happy to answer any questions. Oh, I would note that Mr. Edelman, the family's representative, is also in the audience, as well as Stuart Swift, one of the family members.
Thank you. Now, questions from the commissioner to the petitioner or staff. Commissioner Ruggles?
I don't have any questions.
Commissioner Douglas?
No questions.
Commissioner Dixon?
No questions.
Commissioner Moorhead?
I didn't have any questions.
Commissioner Freeman?
None, thank you.
Then we come to the public testimony portion of the program, and I have one person who would like to speak. Is there anyone else who would like to speak on this proposal? Then I'm going to ask Mr. Miller to please stand. Mr. Miller, do you solemnly declare and affirm that the testimony you're about to give or have previously given is true and correct to your best knowledge?
I do.
Thank you. Please proceed. We ask that each member of the public confine their statement to 5 minutes. I guess in this case, it wouldn't matter because you're the only speaker, so you will not be repeating yourself, I'm sure.
Arthur Miller, 169 Wildwood Road, and with the Lake Forest Preservation Foundation. The Lake Forest Preservation Foundation, early on, leadership was invited to view the then extant Swift House and grounds. We supported, with some reluctance, the tear down without an approved replacement plan, while also expressing a strong desire to set aside and protect the south ravine edge lawn facing into Triangle Park, an historic part of the streetscape. There was no replacement approved because that would be up to the buyer. It was the case was argued. Now the owners and their attorney have decided to develop the property themselves, selling off acre lots instead of in bulk, and they're doing this. They've made some accommodations from the last meeting, which I didn't have in my hand when I wrote this, but they supported this they put this forward to the Plan Commission in conflict somewhat with what the public input had been about that lawn earlier. And that it was part of the ravine edge of that historic space. Preservation organization did request to preserve the south lawn and a public accommodation. Now, the idea of labeling the subdivision as, quote, memorial, unquote, when public interest was overridden largely, seems an affront to the 1930 donors of the library. Two doors to the east, who gave the library as a memorial, but in no way included memorial in any legal name. Several Lake Forest Preservation members have expressed dismay about this untypical designation. No public benefit beyond what was legally required, although I've just heard that they did change some with the streetscape for lots 2 and 3 at the last meeting, was made. The proposed subdivision that did not favor this public accommodation of the front lawn, 2 doors away from the generous memorial, the Lake Forest Library, should not include the word memorial in any of its legal description. It's not typical, and it seems inappropriate in this case. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other members of the public who would like to comment on this agenda item? Then public testimony is closed at this point. I would ask for final questions from the commissioner to the petitioner or staff, after which we would have any petitioner rebuttal to the comments made.
I would just ask staff the comment on Mr. Miller's comment.
To my knowledge, the city has not weighed in on the names of subdivisions except to assure that the name is distinct from subdivisions that have been approved previously. So I don't know that, perhaps it was more of a suggestion. I don't know that the city can require any particular name for a subdivision.
Do we know the genesis of how this got to the name, other than how memorial, I guess, got put into this?
I would suggest that the petitioner could answer that, perhaps.
Mr. Edelman?
Good evening. Actually, the name was my idea.
That explains it.
Yeah. The owners are 12 surviving siblings of Margaret and Hamden Swift. And I told him it's customary, you have to have a name for the subdivision. Why don't we name it in memory of your parents? So that's why I suggested, how about the Hamden and Margaret Smith Memorial Subdivision? Not intending memorial to connote a national monument or memorial, but in memory of the parents. It was as innocent as that.
Thank you. Is there any additional staff response to the public testimony? Okay. Then we're open now for commission discussion and comment. Commissioner Douglas?
Given our prior approval of the tentative plat and given that there are no new facts that would change my approval of that plat, I would be in favor of proceeding with final approval.
Commissioner Moorhead?
I agree with Commissioner Douglas. It appears acceptable based on what we've previously approved.
Commissioner Ruggles?
As do I.
Commissioner Dixon?
As do I.
And Commissioner Freeman?
I'd make a motion to approve the final plat for the Margaret M. and Hampton M. Swift Memorial Subdivision with the recommendation that the City Council adopt an ordinance granting a special use permit. Deferring to the chair, of course, if you had comments that you wanted to offer before I ask for a second.
Subject to, Commissioner, what was laid out, the increased setbacks, the 3 significant groupings of trees.
That's all in the final plat.
Okay.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? The motion carries. Thank you. Our next agenda item is the McKinley Road redevelopment. This is for public hearing and action, and it's continued consideration of a request for a recommendation in support of the site plan and overall Phase 3 of the McKinley Road redevelopment based on general conformance with the previously approved master plan and redevelopment parameters. The Phase 3 property is located on the south side of Westminster, east of McKinley Road, adjacent to and east of the earlier phases of the development. The property owner is the City of Lake Forest. The contract purchaser and applicant is 361 Westminster LLC, which is owned 50% by Peter Whitmer and 50% by Todd Altunian. Presentation will be by Peter Whitmer, architect. I first want to ask any commission members if they have any conflicts of interest or ex parte contacts to report. No. All right. Seeing none, I would also ask if there are any members of the public who are planning to speak on this item. Please submit your request through Kathy Cerniak. I believe there are some papers in the back. And now, Mr. Whitmer, please proceed.
Thank you. We're back from our last meeting last month, and we got some comments last time that were productive, and I think we've modified the design to reflect that. We've had a few comments since the meeting that have come up that we'd like to try to address too with this. So this is what we presented in the November meeting, and basically the comments were mainly on the north end. They're massing on the north end and how that is handled. The overall mass, there was talk about the open space, and then some questions came up again about how the ramp works, how that is configured, and so hopefully we can clarify that with some illustrations with that. So what we focused on the north end and the overall building. One of the things that we were able to do was reduce the overall height of the building, so actually just push it down into the ground, 1.8 foot, and it did some really nice things for us. One is it overall it reduced the height of the building, but also it allowed us to regrade some areas, and I think it'll enhance the relationship of this property line here, and allow us to do some things when we do the final grading plan, which will work out better. The other thing that's nice is that it made our front entry at grade versus having to have a handicap ramp, which took up a lot of space for landscape in that area, which I think is a real improvement in that, and I'll show you that in the landscape plan. One of the other questions that we had was, this is a setback just showing the previous meeting. So really our ramp piece didn't change. Our porch did change. It went to the middle as opposed to being on the east end. And then our third floor setback actually moved back about 10 feet to the south. And so we've got that mansard piece moved back, and we'll see that in the elevations in the perspectives. This is a little closer detail of that. The other thing that was some questions that came up were, where are the HVAC units? In this project, we have residential style condensing units. So they're not a commercial air handler that will be on the roof. It's just basically compressors like you'd have in a single family home. And what makes the most sense to us is that the units for the first floor can't go on the roof just because of the distance limitations of the line sets for that. So what we're proposing is to put it underneath the second floor outside area in this little niche, and then have a brick wall approximately 4 feet, which would screen it from the neighbors so that you wouldn't see those units, and then there'd be a lid over top of it by the second floor outdoor space there. And then the additional units on the roof, I'll show you in the elevations, are hidden behind the parapet on the west side, and then a higher parapet in this recessed area, which allows us to hide those units from the east. There's also elevator override, which again gets hidden by the extended parapets in the center of the project. This is just the elevations that we presented in the November meeting. And really the focus was really on this north end and thinking about how we could integrate a mansard roof into that and minimize the impact of that on the western or the Westminster streetscape. So here's our proposed massing in the elevations. And you can see, we'll go in detail, the north elevations. Really the south elevations, the west elevations only got modified really at the north end. Other than reducing the overall height of the building, pushing it down, this is a little piece that steps up, and then the center piece steps up to hide the mechanical units in the center of the building. Again, just reviewing our relationship of heights of the building. We're now about 8 feet below the parapet height of the existing building that's there, the 723, 727 building. And that's due to two things. One is the grade that we're able to push down about 4'6", so the floor levels are lower, and then also not needing a parapet, only a foot parapet for the roofing in here, where the parapets are taller on the existing building. Just showing the overall height. So now we're at the southeast corner. We're now at 36.6. The center part steps up to 38.6 along that. And then as we step down on the north side, we have 36.6 on the two-story with the mansard. And then the one-story is just a little under 30 feet at 29. And then it steps down to the screened-in porch, which is 17.8. North elevation, this is the space where the HVAC units will be hidden behind. And then this is the stepping down to the north. This is a bird's eye view of the area that we talked about on the north and how that ramp works. So as you drive in, you would be, you come down and then go underneath this. And so we have some sections going through this way and this way. You will not be able to see, very difficult to see the garage door even from the alley side. and you won't be able to see anything from the Westminster side. The idea is that we have landscaping on both sides of these things, so that we minimize the impact. The other comment that came up too was, having brick on this, so this looks actually like a brick base versus just two concrete walls going down into the underground garage. We have a stair that goes alongside this piece that gets access into the garage for pedestrians. This is just the plan of this. So this would be the screened-in porch piece, and then this would be the terrace piece along to the north. And what I'm going to show you is the elevation on the north, and then the section through that area, and then the other way, a section through north-south, and then an elevation showing that, just to illustrate what that area is looking at. So this will be the north elevation. And so you can see the screened-in porch piece, the brick walls that encapsulate the terrace area, and then the ramp is coming down. Then this is a section right at the ramp, so that you go down the stairs here or drive down the ramp, turn south, and then the garage door. This would be the garage door, and this is that terrace above. There's landscaping in this piece between the screened-in porch and the wall of the building behind it. This is the west elevation, looking at it from the northwest, north-south street. So this is a screened-in porch. That's that landscaping piece that we have here. That's the wall of the terrace, which shields when you're on the terrace looking down into the ramp. And then this is a grade out toward the front yard. This is a section through that terrace. So this would be a section through the screened-in porch. This is the railing that looks, there's actually a big spruce tree here that we're actually able to maintain. Fortunately, we think that we can save that during construction, just because of the species of the tree is pretty easily aren't so susceptible to the damage of the roots. So I think that would be a good amenity, and that's our plan on the landscape plan for that. I apologize, these don't project. They would probably look better on your monitor than they do on the screen. But these are the perspectives looking at the northeast corner. This is the existing house on the corner. Then this is our mansard piece with the symmetrical porch piece, and then with the three-story element behind it. And then this is looking directly south onto it. So that the idea is that this front yard, the open space that we created really relates to the open space to the neighbor to the east, and really becomes the front yard of this. And so we think about it as a landscape piece that would be like a front yard. And we can talk about that a little bit in our landscape plan. This is just a rendered color versions of that. This is looking couple different, this hasn't changed. This is our driveway entrance. This is the same it's been in our last presentation. This is a little closer, and then this is driving up on the Westminster going west. Just the color versions of those. And this is just a little bit of the corner. You can see here, you can't, so you have this landscaping piece, the edge of the brick, the stair going down, and you cannot see any of the garage doors from the alley piece of that. These perspectives, so this is from the library side, which really hasn't changed, other than lowering the overall building 1.6 feet down. Sort of similar here, and then this is the end that we've really worked on. So this was a larger piece that really related to this end, which now we've changed this around. The other, so this, the vertical elements of this really relate to the building across. I think you can see it in the model, how that center area then relates to the 727, 723 building across from the Northwest Street. It's the rendering of that. The landscaping plan. So while this has particular species and everything in it, I would still characterize this as a work in progress. We were able to gain some landscaping here, a tree, and really pick this up. That's where the handicap ramp was before. And I think that's a really important piece that we're excited about. The other thing is, about the front yard is that there's an existing tree here and an existing tree here that we can retain. But the idea of having some landscape here, having a front yard, and then really sort of foundation type plantings around that, as you would sort of in a single family house, and think about it like that. And I think you can start to see that. We hopefully everybody got out to see the post that we put up on the site. And basically the first post is located here. It's actually out here. But you can start to see the relationship to the north. And I think for me that was a good barometer of seeing how this relates to the front yard. The next one was the edge of this porch, which was here, and then the next was the start of the 1-story with a mansard, and then the next one was the 2-story with a mansard back here. So that was how those, just to give, I think it was helpful, at least for me, to see it in the site and see the relationship of the pieces three-dimensionally in the site itself. The idea of the landscape plan, Colleen from Mariani Landscape, she's here tonight to answer any questions that may have, and also to listen to comments in the development of it. But once we get this final phase done of the project, there'll be an overall master plan of the landscape, and so that'll be as part of the overall approval of the project. It'll have that landscape plan. And that's important because each individual piece is its own condominium association. So there's a continuity for the whole development that there can't be moving forward someone who wants to change something. They would have approvals from all the groups to do that. So there's a control of the overall landscape with that. And we feel that that's really important with that. We met with the owners last night of the condominium. They feel equally important, that the biggest, a big portion of this development is the landscape and how it overall looks. So I think that there's an importance to having the master landscape plan for the overall development and keeping that consistent. Also, we had comments from the neighbors and surrounding people, and I think we answered. There's a fair amount of questions that we answered, and then there were some comments too that we responded to. We were fortunate to meet with the Donovan, with Doug yesterday, and really this is a plan that that was developed by him, and we appreciate his input on that, and feel like this is a really good start to how we can work together to accommodate the landscape, and feel that there's a lot of good things with this. And that most of the ideas we can incorporate into our landscape plan. And really moving forward, if we're successful to get an approval or tonight, we would then, the first step is to get it surveyed and have the grading worked out, and so that the water drainage works out. And then to incorporate the trees within those things so that we don't put trees in the middle of bottoms of swales, or that they have to work in concert. But it's it's premature to have the landscape plan and not really understand how the grading works and all those things. So, I think this is a great start to incorporate that in this fencing idea. We've also had contact with the south neighbor, and a similar process we had talked about was to understand this, get the grading, understand what existing trees. It's a little different than the north property, is that there's a fair amount of trees there currently, and they're kind of in rough shape. So a lot of them are, while they provide good screening, are weed type trees. And so the idea is that if we can move the grading, understand the grading is, get rid of some of the weed trees, make the grading work better, and then plant more sustainable trees over time back in that area. And that's a process moving forward that we will develop if we get approval from now to get to the HBC and have them so that they have a more final grading landscape plan with that. So, while I say it says all the tree species and everything here, I think that part of it will be developed going forward in the HPC process, then to come back to you for the final process, that will be all worked out. At least that's what our plans are moving forward. Let's see. The other thing that we were asked to do was a sun study. Sorry, this is cut off the winter. This is the winter solstice. You can see here, takes a little time. Takes a lot of time. So the sun's not going to go up.
What times are we looking at?
This is from sunrise to sunset. Did it go?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, because I'm watching my monitor. My monitor did not go. So that would be from sun up to sundown. And then the next one, which the summer one, which I was interested in because of, you think that due west is actually this way. The sun, and after this goes, you'll see it all watch there. There you go. Okay, you can see how it's through here that the sun is coming in the end. So I'll run that one more time just to see that. Is it going? Oh. I guess my point is in the summer, at the end, it actually comes through the center. So by pulling this building back and having this, we allow to have sun come through the backyard with that. Let me try that one more time just so you can see that. There you go. All right, you can see right coming through now. That's noon time, and this is in the afternoon. And you can see how the sun comes through there, and then that's obviously when all these are blocked out through there. So I think by pulling the building back, if we were to have go back to the other schemes where we have buildings there, that would actually block the sun coming through onto that piece. And so having that opening is what I thought was meaningful. This is the first time we weren't able to. It took a little while for us to get this, and so this is the first time that everybody's seen that. We weren't able to share that with the neighbors earlier than tonight. All right, the next thing that we wanted to cover was the relationship to Market Square. We talked about this early on in the project, and so I thought it was a good, we had asked to show this again. And here you can see that, and this is Market Square, this is a green space of Market Square, and so pretty similar space that we're creating on the south end. And then while this is not as long, it's actually wider. And I thought it came up in the meeting about it not being a open space. Like the north open space is not, like, you're calling it the wrong thing. It's really a front yard. And I think you're right. After I saw that, I was like, yeah, it makes sense that it is a front yard in the contextual. I think this is a public space, and this makes sense that people occupy and all this, where this is really a relationship of the front yard. And, through this whole process, I brought all the models here, so that the first one that we had, and the next one that we had, and then the one that we currently is obviously in the site there. But I do think that open space to the north makes a lot of sense in terms of being a front yard. And I think that, it's, obviously people related to the south want to have more open space to the library and to the south, while, people on the north side think that, it'd be better to push the whole building south. So, there is a sort of balance between the two, and I would say it's pretty equal on both sides. The other thing I would say is that now, now that we're up about we're getting ready to pour the roof section of this building, you can start to see this space and the relationship of this building back. When you drive through here, you can start to feel that space. and understand what it is. And I think the scale and you know, we've talked about it a lot, but I think you're seeing it in 3 dimensions. You know, to me, I was sort of an aha moment, because I do think that that space is significant, and it does make the opportunities for the library in the future much different than it was having as a, you know, as a parking lot and commercial buildings in the back. Let's see if I got everything. The only other thing that I would note is, unfortunately, we were contacted by the staff this morning, or Kathy called us, and you know, in terms of the working hours, that we're trying to maintain work hours. There's a lot of people on the site, a lot of things, so unfortunately, was not good timing for us. This morning, we knew that we were, somebody supposedly had started before 7, so you know, we've talked to them, and so that they understand that we can't do that. In the schedule, we poured the 3rd floor, I think Monday, and we're really working against the weather here. So we're trying to pour the roof, which is the majority of the on the site. That's when we have the most trucks, the most everything. We're trying to do it on the 23rd. So it looks pretty good right now, weather-wise and all that. So hopefully by the 23rd, by the end of the year, then, you know, that's the major concrete on this, when we get, you know, 30 trucks coming to the site for that. So we should be topped out, hopefully, on that. If everything goes well, it looks pretty good today. But we understand, you know, the ramifications or the limitations of our hours, and we're just trying to get it done as fast as we can, you know, for everybody. With that, I think that's all the information, and those are all the major elements that I heard in our last meeting. And if there's any other questions or comments, happy to answer, and look forward to hearing everybody's comments. Thanks.
Thank you. And now identification of issues by staff, which I believe will also give us some direction if we move forward tonight on how additional steps will be laid out in the future. Kathy?
Thank you, Chairman Kerr, members of the commission. I won't repeat the changes that Mr. Whitmer described. I'd like to focus a little bit on reviewing where we are in the process. I acknowledge that the process has been long, and understandably there's some confusion. So I'd like to spend a couple minutes just talking about where we've been, where we are today, and the process yet ahead of us. Starting with the Plan Commission, recognizing that some other task force studied this area earlier, but in 2016, the Plan Commission spent a considerable amount of time thinking through and ultimately recommending a master plan for this area. The 3 properties fronting on McKinley Road that were at that time developed with office buildings, as well as a portion of the city site, which is the narrow parcel which we're now talking about as Phase 3. Thank you. In January of 2016, the City Council did approve the master plan as recommended by the Plan Commission. Moving forward from that, the City Council determined that the northern portion of the city property, it really made sense to incorporate that as part of this overall development rather than leave it as an orphan piece. As a follow-up to that, the city negotiated with the developer, and although at first the developer was reluctant, there was agreement to enter into a purchase-sale agreement. The parcel that we're talking about today, the Phase 3 parcel, is still in the ownership of the city. Moving forward, the Plan Commission saw the Phase 2 building, and during that discussion, there was acknowledgement that there had been some changes to that Phase 2 parcel because a portion of the church property was acquired to allow the width of the Phase 2 building to align with the Phase 1 building. That resulted in a fair amount of discussion by the Plan Commission about the green space that's located to the east of the Phase 2 building, and at the Plan Commission's, as I recall it, strong urging, the concept of expanding the green space to the east onto the south portion of the Phase 3 property, that's where that concept came from. At the same time, the Plan Commission very strongly and very clearly said to staff and to the developer, do not move forward in finalizing plans for Phase 3. Come back to the City Council early, come back to the Plan Commission early, come back to us with conceptual plans, allow us and the neighbors to have discussion and input into the Phase 3 plan. I don't think the Plan Commission contemplated that conceptual discussion would take as long as it has. The commission first saw a conceptual plan for Phase 3, a conceptual site plan for Phase 3 in March. You saw it again in June. You saw it again in September. You saw it again in November. And in response to your direction, in response to neighborhood comments, after each of those meetings, the site plan was changed, the concept for building massing was changed, and importantly, through this conceptual phase, from the staff perspective, we discouraged the developer from moving into preliminary engineering or an overall landscape plan for the overall site, or moving forward with development of a plan development plat or with the vacation ordinance, because until we had at least a nod from the Plan Commission that there is a site plan, and perhaps that site plan is before you tonight, that there is a site plan that the Plan Commission can conceptually agree is generally consistent with the master plan, it really didn't make sense for the developer to spend time and money developing the technical aspects, the technical plans and documents that are required before the Plan Commission can take formal action on the petition. Whether that was the right decision or wrong decision, certainly the petitioner has spent a lot of time and money developing the different scenarios. But again, I believe that process of going through this in-depth conceptual review and discussion of the site plan did result in improvements. It resulted in a lot of issues being aired, a lot of concerns being aired. And the city of Lake Forest, for better or worse, has a history of having pretty in-depth review processes. This process was followed during the redevelopment of the Laurel and Western Avenue site, as well as many other projects. So where we are today is you have a site plan before you that has been modified in response to, over the course of 4 or 5 meetings. It would be appropriate for the Plan Commission today to give a clear indication of whether the site plan that's before you tonight is or is not consistent with the master plan. And from there, the developer can really decide whether to proceed with Phase 3, and if so, they really need to proceed with preparing all those technical documents. In the event that you do issue direction tonight that the plan is consistent with the master plan, you are not granting any entitlements from a zoning perspective, you are not approving a final development plan, you are not authorizing any construction. You do have some suggested recommendations in your staff report. What you would be doing is, again, giving an indication to the developer and staff that the site plan before you appears to be consistent with the master plan, and encouraging the development of preliminary engineering plans and a whole list of other documents, as would be done prior to tentative consideration of any development plan by the Plan Commission. I would anticipate that this project would, in January, go before the Historic Preservation Commission for further consideration of building massing, roof forms, detailing materials, window types, screening of mechanicals, overview of landscaping and hardscaping. During that same time, the final plan, or the tentative various plans would be developed, and then we would come back before the Plan Commission, and you would hold your formal public hearing. Hopefully, we have all the substantive issues worked out by then, and you would forward a tentative recommendation to the City Council. Ultimately, during the final phase, and the final phase usually is pretty perfunctory, as it was with the SWIFT petition this evening. But ultimately, the city council will approve this development if they choose to do so through an ordinance. Plan developments are approved as a special use or a final development plan ordinance. Different names, the same things, but it would be approved through an ordinance. There's been some questions raised by Mr. Babowitz, an attorney for the Donovans, about why an ordinance has not yet been approved. The city council has never followed the process of approving a zoning change or approving entitlements until they fully understand what the project is, what the site plan is, what the landscaping looks like, what the materials are, with architectural approvals already in place. That has been consistently the city process. So again, just to be clear, there are no approvals for this development on this Phase 3 property. The developer could walk away tomorrow, they don't own the property, and this property is Zone GR3, and we would begin a discussion about the future of the property. So I just wanted to lay out the process. Again, I apologize for confusion that I've caused over the course of the many months, but the process, I believe, has resulted in an improvement. I also wanted to respond quickly to a couple other items. At the end of the last meeting, there was a request to talk with the library. Staff did talk with the library specifically about the value of the open space. And from the library perspective, having that open space configured as it is, really large enough to perhaps hold some small events or gatherings out there, really is seen as a positive as the library thinks about its future. It provides the opportunity to have perhaps a second front at some point of the library, and an area without a significant grade in which, again, perhaps some activities related to the libraries could occur, or simply informal gatherings. With respect to work hours, at the last meeting, we did speak about work hours. I did encourage residents to contact the police department if they observe work going on earlier than 7 o'clock. The code does prohibit activity, operation of equipment, disruptive activity, construction activity prior to 7 o'clock. The police supervisors have instructed their officers to issue citations. I met with the chairman on Monday, and Chairman Carey, you asked me if we had received any complaints about working earlier than 7 p.m., and as of Monday morning, we hadn't. Since that time, we have received complaints. We did talk with the police department. We did talk with the developer. Again, the best way that we can be responsive is to know when that's occurring. I think with that, I will turn it back to you. If you choose to do so this evening, there is a suggested motion, and again, we'll clarify exactly what that motion is at that point. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, are there questions or requests for clarification from members of the commission to the petitioner or staff? Commissioner Dixon?
I have no questions at this time.
Commissioner Moorhead?
Just have two questions for the petitioner. You had a visual up, just the square footage of the 3 phases. I think phase 1 was like about 49,255 square feet. Is that
Correct. 275 square feet, yes.
25? And then phase 2 is 29,393.
Correct.
And then the proposed phase 3 is 22,929. Is that right?
Correct.
Okay. And then I think you mentioned that step down from the 723 and 727 and 705 North McKinley buildings to the proposed phase 3, the step down in height was about 8 feet.
Correct.
Between the proposed phase 3 and the adjoining property, the 373 Westminster, do you know, I don't know, maybe you mentioned it, but do you know if there's a step down, and if so, what it is?
I think I don't know, here's a slide that shows that. So I think this is what you're talking about. So this will be the 360 Westminster on the north side of Westminster? Is that what you're?
Do you have one with the one right next door, the,
The other way.
like
This I have is the other two neighbors on the south side, and then let me see what I got. So this will be how that. Here's
That's how it would look.
375. Correct. So this is the piece that's basically the porch piece is about at the face of this. Then this is back slightly, and then this is in the back third, or actually in the back quarter of the lot is this piece back here. So you can see the relationship. I think is that what you're?
That is.
Okay.
I thought I saw it for a second in your presentation. So the height of the 373 Westminster House is 25 feet.
I have it approximately 25 foot, 25.3 feet, yeah.
Okay.
Correct.
And the, okay,
Does that clarify what you're thinking?
that's all I have, yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Commissioner Ruggles?
So Peter, I have some questions that they might be more related for when HPC looks at the project, but I just wanted to bring it up.
Sure.
Today's meeting. The first one is in regards to the terraces, and I think the image that, if you could pull it up, was the north massing elevation. It was sort of a three-dimensional image of the north portion of the building.
Let me.
Yeah, so when I look at this image, you have the terrace that's directly, north of the screen porch, and that's going to be a paved surface, right?
The terrace is, we're thinking it's bluestone,
Okay,
correct?
and then it looks to me like it wraps around to the eastern
This
part
piece.
of the screen porch, yeah.
Correct.
Is that correct?
Yes, yeah.
And are those open to the whole building? Are they intended to be like a public gathering space that people are going to be out there barbecuing and? and
No,
all?
they're exclusive for the unit itself, that is just like a single-family residence would have.
Okay.
So all these spaces, the screened-in porch, this outside terrace will be part of the first floor unit.
Okay.
in
But
there.
there will be people out there at certain times, so you'll have screening between.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's, one of the ideas is that there's a significant, that existing tree that really screens this. Unfortunately, the existing garage is there too.
Sure.
But I think, yeah, the development of this is the idea, is to have that screening between there. The other thing I think is pulling this screened-in porch off of, one is to make this thing symmetrical, and sliding it toward the center takes the screened-in porch further away from that space too. And then the idea of having a solid wall, brick wall there to help that containment for that too. But yeah, no, the idea, and I think that's really what we're looking at in the landscape plan is to minimize that. But it is not a like all building.
Not like a community
No,
deck.
not like the open space to the south, which would be anybody can really use. Any public could use. Yeah.
And that's like a 42-inch high guardrail or something
Correct.
like that. Okay. The other thing, and again, it's probably for HPC, and I know you've mentioned that mechanicals are going to be hidden behind the parapets, and that would include any venting, chimney flues, and things like that you might have.
Yeah, I'm just trying to think about, when you say
Yeah, just
venting, I
because,
mean,
like-
are you talking about
Well,
plumbing venting?
Well, yeah, because on the buildings that are presently there, you can see a lot of the rooftop mechanicals and just different things popping up out of the roof. But the intention is the parapets on this building are to cover any, building venting.
I want to be careful in what we say because of 6 or a 4-inch plus the little tube for a plumbing stack is we're going to have some of those out in that space. The intent is that it would be because of the perspective of it, you won't see it. But all the idea is to screen the HVAC units and the elevator override of that.
Okay.
for
Well, so that could be something that HPC and
Yeah,
you guys
yeah,
will discuss as
I'm
that
a little bit
goes
puzzled by
further.
your comment though, because on the penthouse, I guess is what you're saying is that you have that one elevator override that's going up the penthouse. You
Right.
see that, okay, but you don't see any mechanical units.
No.
Yeah, I mean, there's no visual mechanical units.
So getting back to the roof, are there any rooftop terraces
No.
planned for this building?
No, we intentionally tried to have all the outdoor spaces either face north or south or west. And really, there isn't any south. It's really west and north. Yeah, so there is no, the only outside space is in a second floor, in that little niche between the two, in the second floor terrace. And if they're in the final phases, if we can eliminate that due to the unit count, we would eliminate that outdoor space if we could.
And one other question, it could be for Kathy as well. I know when we talked about the open space to the south, that, the library might want to use it for events and such. Is there something in the language of, the approval process that area is always open to the public? I guess my concern is that somewhere down the line, the property owners might put up a fence and say private property, library cannot use this space.
It's my understanding in the beginning, there is a public easement over that space, much like the roads and the sidewalks. So I can't tell you what people would do, but it's recorded on the plat of survey. So, they have the rights to be on that space, which I think is the way you convey that kind of information.
It's just a question, because I could see that somebody, maybe
It
property owners would be like, oh, I don't want, these library
It is. I
kids
mean,
on my lawn.
It's shared space. I mean, there's no question about that.
Okay.
But, it's our intent to have an easement over that space, which allows anybody to walk on it. And I do think that that's important, about this community is that the walkability through that, the connection, that was one of the premier things, was the walkability of that through to the library is an important thing.
I can just add that those are the kind of details that we will be looking at, and you will be looking at as we bring the plan development plat to you. It will identify areas which are open to the public.
Okay, thank you.
Just while you have that slide up, could I ask you, Mr. Whitmer, that front terrace now that is right over the garage door right there, that also, and this is probably an HPC question, but that also could be green space, that could be a lawn too, could it not, or no?
It could be. You could grow grass on like a rooftop if they saw it could be. I mean, you really can't see that surface from
Right.
anywhere but from the unit itself.
So you wouldn't be able to see that surface
I mean, from the street, you can't see that.
see it, the
from
grade.
I mean, I guess from the only part you really see is from the condominium building up here that you could look down on it. So, I would assume that whoever buys that unit would develop, would put pots or plantings or, whatever that is on that. But it would be like a roof terrace.
Okay, thank you. Sorry.
Commissioner Freeman?
Just a point of clarification, Kathy, and I appreciate your willingness to take responsibility for whatever there was in the process, but we certainly have been at this for some time. It strikes me, though, that for the same reason that we wouldn't put the petitioner to an unnecessary expense, et cetera, related to drawings and all of that, that the normal course would be not to bring this to city council for some kind of determination on an ordinance until such time as we knew fully what we were approving in the way of a plan. Otherwise, the city would be incurring legal expense and having to change ordinances and do that multiple times. So it doesn't strike me as that it falls on you. I appreciate you willing to take accountability, but I mean, is that not the same logic, that you finish the plan completely first and then give city council the ability to create an ordinance that encompasses that.
Historically, the City Council of Lake Forest has not granted entitlements, whether it's a zone change or approval of a planned development, which allows multifamily on this, until they, exactly as you said, Commissioner Freeman, until all the details are known.
And this body has no authority to grant those entitlements. We have to send that back to city council.
Correct. Your action tonight, if you choose to take action, will not do any more than really give some assurance or not to the petitioner on whether to move forward.
And it strikes me as not being, although the other petition moved a little bit more quickly, much different than the one that we just approved earlier tonight, where we make a recommendation that city council adopt an ordinance that grants a special use permit, but we don't have the authority. We're a recommending body in that respect.
Correct.
All right, thank you.
Commissioner Douglas?
No questions.
Another question, if I could, Chairman. There was the discussion in regards to the utility poles, and when you walk that site, the utility poles are on the west side of the alleyway currently. And it should be noted, and I think as the petitioner noted in the last and in several meetings, that those utility poles are part of the 333 building, the Westminster building there, and are owned and/or controlled by the 333 building. Anybody can correct me if I'm wrong. I think that's...
The only thing I would add is I think that the petitioner offered to do that as a combined expense, which would have reduced the cost of lowering those lines had those neighbors taken advantage of that, was my memory of the testimony.
And I think that is correct, Commissioner Freeman. Would there be a way, and I guess this is a question to staff, would there be a way for the city to get involved? I mean, there's obviously an expense associated with that. There's a sale purchase agreement. The sale purchase agreement could be, if the city so chose to reduce maybe the purchase price in an effort to get those lines, because the alleyway still has to be torn up, and possibly getting all the parties involved to bear that expense and/or come to some sort of agreement on that at this point. Because I think the project, if you walk the site, I think as everybody has, that alleyway is going to be a focal point both on the Westminster side. And if there can be some, and again, understanding that it's not the petitioner's responsibility or control, and/or the 333 building turned it down, I would have to believe that there's some way to come to an agreement between the city, 333, possibly the developers, and coming to some sort of solution on those lines.
So can I ask a question, which I know we're kind of getting into comment, but it is a question.
It
So
is,
I guess
I
if
mean,
it's-
yeah, I
but-
didn't know when to raise this, so.
Well, so I wonder though, do you not see the lowering of those, and first of all, I agree with you, but to me, I think the lowering of those lines provides a visual benefit to the residents of this community as well as those in the 333 community, right? I mean, isn't that your point, is that it improves the visual appearance of
I think not only of the 333, but I just think the whole streetscape appearance
I
as,
agree.
as anybody going down Westminster, so
But it's
the
private,
neighbors.
it's private property.
Totally
And my
agree.
view would be that if it's private property and would benefit the private property owner on which those lines reside, they should pay for it, not the city. That would just be my point of view. I think it's regrettable that they didn't take advantage of that offer when it was made available to them, and I for one would be against the city incurring a cost that's meant to improve the visual sight lines of private property owners. But that's just my.
And I would agree with that, but I think you're relatively speaking, the cost would be de minimis to the city. We're not talking about, you're talking maybe tens of thousands of dollars in the overall scheme of, the project here. We're not talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars. I think if it's collectively shared, but and I'm not.
But respectfully, if it was important enough to them from a visual sightline perspective, then they would have paid for it. and they didn't think it was important enough, so, I mean, I just don't think the city should be picking up the tab as we approve these things. It's not fair to the rest of the residents. I think it would improve the site. I agree entirely with that, and it's regrettable that they didn't do it, but clearly they don't see the value, so I don't know why we would impose that on the city.
We have actually had the same thought. I think what we can do is we can facilitate a conversation, and maybe there's a partnership there through which we can come to a good solution. So we had already given that some thought, and we will at least explore opportunities.
And that, at
Point
this
taken.
point, yeah, that's all that is being raised by myself at this point.
Thank you both. Any other questions for petitioner or staff from commission members? Seeing none, we'll move to the public testimony portion. I would like to give members of the public a minute to come up and take a look at the model, which shows the latest rendering of the property with the step down towards the north elevation, and also ask anyone who would like to comment on this agenda item, please, if you haven't submitted your name to Kathy, please do so now.
If they do that, might we take a quick break now? Oh, okay. Just the proverbial two birds. I just wanted to make it clear to people that, you know, if not, then we'll deal with people for being stubborn. If you don't think it's worth it. Right. Just.
Thank you.
But I addressed this.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Thank you. Okay, thank you. And at this time, I would ask all those who are planning to testify to please stand so I can swear you in. Thank you. Do you solemnly declare and affirm that the testimony you're about to give is true and correct to the best of your knowledge? Thank you. And we will start with Arthur Miller. And would you please state your name and address for the record once you're at the podium? Thank you.
Arthur Miller, 169 Wildwood Road, and my comment is very brief, but what's worked out really nicely on McKinley, opposite the train station, is that the two buildings have the same Georgian brand to them. They look very much the same. And this third building, which faces onto the other street, the building in this thing that the north elevation shows a building that is reminiscent, nostalgic of the 1860 or 1870, probably 1870 building that was there, the stable. But it doesn't connote that this is part of a development that was, that starts over on the other side. And to me, it seems like bringing that brand along, as in the November presentation drawing that was, which I don't know, it was in the packets that were at the back, but that had a more of a Georgian feel. It was the same kind of vocabulary as the two principal buildings on McKinley. And I'm just saying that that's probably a classier look on Westminster and probably will relate better for the neighbors. Now, if it's a question of people peering down from the balconies above, you don't let them peer down from the balconies above. But I think that the Georgian, somehow having the Georgian consistently look rather than the a recreation of the stable from 1870 is, in the long run, looking at the next 100 years, a better approach. Thank you.
Thank you. Jim Upsitnik.
Hi, Jim Upsitnik, 971 Verta Lane, Lake Forest. My comments will be short also. I just think we're trying to do too much in a smaller space than it warrants. I think the massing is a real problem for this, and then in looking at the layout, you're looking at a 15-foot setback between the east side of the building and the property line. I mean, that's less than that bowed wreath over there to the wall, and you're talking a 3-story building up against the other properties, and I think it's doing a great disservice to the neighbors that are already there. Thank you.
Thank you. Doug Donovan? Mr. Donovan?
Good evening. Thank you. My name is Doug Donovan. I reside with my family at 373 East Westminster, which is directly to the east of the photo that happens to be up right now, or the rendering that happens to be up right now. As mentioned during the introduction, I reached out to the developer, sat with Peter and Todd days ago, yesterday or the day before, and I did that at the urging of the last plan commission that we talk about what's going on. So I just tried to take a proactive step there. So I had my engineer and architect, landscape architect, draw up a plan that tried to mitigate the presumption of development. So with that, I took that, and that meeting was very cordial, and I thought it was a positive exchange and good levels of agreement. I think we heard that largely, but I'll just kind of reiterate it, that we agreed to implement the landscape as presented with fencing and a driveway culvert to help mitigate the intrusion of the Phase 3 structure. And those are represented on the plan. If we need to get into the details, we can. But, you know, our plan is not really presuming that I'm going to have a new low spot as part of grading, so I don't know that whatever would be planted as species needs to be changed at some future time. They also agreed to ensure no water passes onto our property by creating and incorporating swale drainage and sewer networks along the borders with emphasis to the east property line. And that's been a concern from the beginning. So those are steps in the right direction. But I did tell them, I tried to sleep on the whole thing, but I did tell them that the massing was a concern for me. And now, after having time to reflect on this whole thing and this plan, you know, I'm sorry to say, I regret to say, that the rest of this still feels repetitive and exhausting and very, you know, it's stressful. It's really stressful. So we continue to sink more costs to defend ourselves and taking time away from our families and our welfare and our quality of life to try to see this through. The shadow study we saw, you know, was interesting. I really couldn't follow very well what it was said. But I think it really distracts from the bigger conversation tonight, and that is the massing of this proposal. So that's clearly what we're farthest apart on. Everything else, it seems like we can kind of get there, but the massing, it's just too much. If you take the AC units that are reflected in the current renditions, and you took everything from the AC units to the south, I'm sorry, from AC units to the north towards Westminster, if you deleted all that, you'd have a core structure of what fundamentally was the foundation of the prior Mason building. So I'm not saying you got to delete all that and make all that green space. That might be nice, but that doesn't seem to be the conversation. But what I am saying is that was what the master plan was speaking to when we started. And then now we have a 40-foot structure stepping down to whatever it is on Westminster immediately adjacent to us. And that is something that's just, we just can't get on board with. I understood tonight that the northeast corner of the building is stepped down to 39.3 feet. What's not so clear to me is that that's a perspective from its own foundation. We talked about it a little bit in some of the questions, but the perspective from our foundation is considerably more. You know, it's, I don't know for sure, but it's something, 3 or 4 feet more. So easily, from my yard, we're looking at a 40-foot structure. So 15 feet is me to that table. 15 feet seems farther away when you're looking across than it does looking up. 40 feet, so step over 15 feet, then look up 40 feet. That's massive. So we're never going to be able to get beyond that. That completely changes takes away any privacy we ever thought we had. There's going to be no question of what steak is on our grill. There's going to be no question of what brand t-shirt we're wearing that day. It's that imminent and invasive that we can landscape away, and 40 feet is going to be pretty hard to address. So to us, 40 feet, it just doesn't make sense. I did bring an old snapshot tonight. We just talked about a little bit, the historic Mason building. I brought that just to pass around after, but just maybe you'd think about that in that building was there when we moved in. It's been there forever. The green space was there, but that building, it always seemed tall to us, kind of massive, but it was fine. It was always what it was. But that building is a 1.5-story building. It seems quite similar to what is shown as the first unit, if I understand the drawing correctly, the first unit here. So if you look at the streetscape that was shown, that first unit is considerably taller than our home. And that doesn't even start talking about the 3-story units. So it just gives a little perspective of how that massing sits on the street and how it steps down as you approach the street. I think I probably had more to say, but I just kind of speed read through my comments. So I'll just leave it that unfortunately we feel like this proposal is not adequately considerate of its impact to the immediate neighbors in the neighborhood. We don't see it as fair, just, or neighborly with that kind of massing directly in our backyard. So thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Donovan. And our last speaker is Romy Lfplan.
Good evening. My name is Rami Lfplan. I live at 410 East Woodland Road. I had no intention of speaking tonight. I came to hear about Route 60, but here I am. I was listening in on all of this, and just as a interested audience member, I was thinking of the massing of this building, and it does seem very high. I do agree with Mr. Upsitnik, and it occurs to me that when we were talking about Laurel and Western, Kathy can certainly correct me because my memory is hazy, it's a long time ago, but we were talking about 35-foot high buildings in the downtown area, made higher at Laurel and Western because the grading
raised those buildings up higher. And we took a story off that most southwest rental building there. So massing is a problem there, and as I was watching the sun study there, I was thinking, well, how would this neighbor be able to really read this, because there's no before and after. He's a very sunny site there, as I can imagine anyway. Which brings me to what I really would like to address tonight, which is sort of to challenge you about the master planning process. I admit I'm a Johnny-come-lately here. I haven't paid any attention, but as far as your mission goes, as a plan commission, my question comes down to what really was considered on this entire site. I can't comment on this Phase 3 building, but as I look at that site plan, I'm actually kind of more in favor of Phase 3 than Phase 2 as a site planning alternative, because when I look at, well, let me step back. When the train station was being renovated, I recall standing at the east entrance to the train station. It had a plan that the front stairs would go up to the front door, except the front stairs were totally off-center with that front door, and I had the great opportunity of standing there with City Manager Kiley and the staff and saying, wait a minute, you know, the plan is, this just doesn't match up. And as we were standing there and we were looking at this, at across the street toward the library, and there was that one-story building there, I said, Mr. Kiley, why doesn't the city consider buying that one-story building and creating a flip of Market Square, a green space that continues from the west side of the train station right over to that green space, so that and you could develop retail there too. I mean, you could throw everything on it, but a green space so that there would be a connection, and then you could buy, I mean, we had this conversation, you could buy that church property and create a new driveway into the library so that you could actually, and you can see it on the model very clearly, you could create an addition to the library right where the existing road into the driveway from Deer Path is. So the new library entrance would be off of McKinley. So that brings me to what goes into your master planning. Are you, as a plan commission, looking at these alternative options, you know, plan, what's the old adage? Plan twice, cut once. You know, what alternatives are you looking at before you sell city property? And next, in terms of assessing landscapes, I do landscape designs. And at Laurel and Western, we were promised a landscape that looked like Sissinghurst in England. We did not get Sissinghurst by any stretch of the imagination. And that landscape cheaped out. And the community amenities disappeared over time. So I'm here to say, with all due respect, I don't know that you're landscape designers. I don't think the HBC includes any, but what are your landscape standards? Are we putting sustainable standards into effect here, into our plans? Are we providing a space for future community gardens? Are we providing herbs that the community can use? Some parsley in the garden would be kind of cool. It would also sustain pollinators. Are we putting plants that have berries? I mean, are we putting as you asked Ms. Ruggles, rooftop gardens into our developments? What are those landscape standards? In fact, at Laurel and Western, I've been called out numerous times to the neighbors because there's so much stormwater going down that they can't even sustain Pachysandra. And the invasive trees that you take down, that's all well and good, except they were 30 feet high. And the replacements are 7-foot high arborvitaes. That does not provide any buffer for for the residents next door. Never mind the stormwater problems that seem to come after. So that's what I challenge you as a plan commission. Where are we going here? What are the bigger pictures that you're looking at when you take a look at these individual projects? How do they add up for the larger area that you're considering? So thank you for the time, and I really appreciate you letting me sound off, if you will. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. At this time, are there any other members of the public who would like to give testimony? Then at this point, the public testimony section is closed. We would ask for final questions from the commission to petitioner or staff, and after that, petitioner rebuttal. Commissioners? Does the petitioner wish to make any comments at this time?
I think I'd just like to respond a little bit. One, to Art's comments, and we've always appreciated his thought in that. And I think this is a tough answer here in terms of creating a community that is respectful of different things and a lot of different forces. So, I think the thought process is interesting, and I think there was some positives and negatives of both of those. And I think we could look at that at the HBC again. I understand what those comments are. I think Doug, I thought, captivated our meeting really well. Obviously, he still feels that the massing is too large, and I understand that piece. I feel like from where we started and that point, we've continually tried to better integrate that. And I think by the one building solution, we're in the back quarter. The 3-story piece is in the back quarter of the lot for that, and not having 2 buildings does make the impact much less. The other thing I would say is, and then, I think we did study a lot of different solutions, and, everyone, there was a few people here from the beginning. I think we looked at a lot of those ideas in the beginning of what this was. And I say, we really created a community here, which we feel like does serve Lake Forest for the long term. We've created a building type that didn't exist. It's been very popular with people who have been long-term residents of this, and it allows them to live in a community that they love and that they appreciate. And so, my meeting last night with 11 other people who currently live in that space love living in Lake Forest and said thank you for being here. So I think, very, very proud of what we come up with. And so, I think there's pieces of this absolutely can get improved, but I do think the process that we went through was very thoughtful, very timely, and, we've come up with what we feel like is a pretty good solution to move forward with this. And I think, while we can move it north, south, open space on either ends, people like it larger one way or the other, but I think this is a good compromise for this. And I think, the walkability of this, the location, the type, really does serve the whole community. And we're excited about it. And hopefully, we will continue to work with the different groups and move through the process and allow this to be continued. Thank you.
Thank you. And now staff response to public testimony.
Thank you, Chairman Kier. Just a few comments. Mr. Donovan spoke about drainage. Since the last meeting, we did have an opportunity for Mr. Donovan to meet directly with the city engineer. Again, we're in a conceptual site plan phase of this project. The city engineer has not seen preliminary drainage plans, and in fact, they're not developed yet, pending where the site plan goes. The discussion, it was helpful for the city engineer to hear directly from Mr. Donovan. We do know there is a grade change there, and the city engineer is very aware of it and is already thinking of ways to install storm sewers or make sure that we properly direct drainage and perhaps even create some improvements to Mr. Donovan's property. Second, I won't repeat some of my historical comments I made at the beginning of the meeting, but only very briefly. Long before the Plan Commission considered the master plan for this area in 2016, there was discussion about what should occur in that area when it developed. And there was a very conscious decision by the City Council that what was needed was more residential density, more residential housing types in the vicinity of the Central Business District. And that theory really has proven true because these units are very much in demand, and what we're hearing is that people really enjoy living there. So there was absolutely consideration of, should all of this be green space? Should some of it be green space? Should it be redeveloped as office? And a very conscious decision was that it should be multifamily. And then the final thing I'll say is that many of the points raised by Rami Lopat, you do have an opportunity as we move through the update of the comprehensive plan to think about some standards that you may want to strengthen through the comprehensive plan. Comprehensive plan doesn't dictate, but it can certainly lead to some amendments to the code. So whether it's sustainability, building form, uses, all of that you will have an opportunity to talk through over the next 12 months as we move through different chapters of the comprehensive plan. That's all I have. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Now we come to commission discussion and comment, and I open it up to commission members to make comments on the current proposal before us.
So I'll start, I guess, with a few comments. First of all, just to echo Peter's comment at the end, you should be proud of this development. And Mr. Miller, I think that was Peter's way of a roundabout thank you, because if you saw the drawing from November, it had much more of a Georgian appearance, and we made him change it. So I'd rather not start that all over again, but as much as I appreciate your comments on it, I think what we were trying to accomplish there was something that had more of a residential look than mirrored the more commercial look at the front end of those buildings. And I do think the way that this project has turned out, and I again thank all of the neighbors, but in particular the church and the library for being good neighbors in this cause of figuring out ways that you could help us better understand those needs and find a way to create a green space that really in the end should end up hopefully mirroring Market Square in size more than appearance, but also I think provide what we were charged to provide, which is a usable space to the community. And I think as the library evolves, as we all evolve as library users through these technology changes, I have great hope for that space. I think it could actually be something that will benefit the community as a whole, and that's why I was against pushing that building any further to the south. So I think it is, I thank all of the neighbors because I think we got some great comments early on from the neighbors in the 333 Westminster building. I appreciate, Mr. Donovan, very much your comments tonight and your willingness to work to try and perhaps, as Kathy says, maybe even improve the grading of your own property as a part of this. I mean, that's not typically the way developments are supposed to work, but that's kind of the way our community works. You know, everybody gets together and you try and figure out ways that while we're here, let's see if we can improve the other. I hope the neighbor to your south is as open to working with the developer to try and figure out some of those issues, and I think you might actually be able to mitigate more of that look than perhaps you may have initially feared with all of the changes that have happened. I would continue to encourage the 333 neighbors to find a way. I do think it benefits both properties, both the developer's property as well as 333's. I'm, as I've already stated, against the city funding that, but I just think it's meant to better the views for both property owners, and you should figure out a way to make that happen. If it's important. If it isn't, then leave the wires up. But overall, I guess what my point here would be is as we send this to HPC, I hope, Kathy, that we're not sending it to them with the idea that they start all over. We've been at this a very long time. And by that, I want to make sure everybody remembers your point, which is, when I say a very long time, I mean like the 1980s, 1990s, talking about this property. I haven't been with it that long. It feels like it some nights, but not quite that long, but certainly since the beginning. And I think it's a good example of how our community can be in conflict at points, but end up with a much better product. And so, again, you should be proud of it, and I thank you for all of the work and time that you've put into it, and all of the neighbors, because it definitely did take a village to give all the neighboring properties' interests some weight in this, and so for that, I'm grateful. Thank you.
Any other?
Yeah, I would just add, I mean, Commissioner Freeman did a very nice job of summarizing that. I think a thanks needs to go to the staff for the shepherding of this process and trying to bring all the parties together. It's certainly the process, as Commissioner Freeman, has been made better because of it. And Kathy did a nice job in the materials, which I think everybody present here tonight and everybody watching certainly can have access to that material. But there's a nice review in there, as Commissioner Freeman just described. It started, a long time ago, back in, at least the records that I've seen, 1998 with the comprehensive plan at that point, and the city council and the comprehensive plan at that time talking about a development for this site. And then that was consistent in 2011 with the Culture Corridor Task Force, and wanting to get rid of the office buildings on the west side of the tracks, or excuse me, on the east side of the tracks, and doing a residential development there. And I think it's important that people understand that this, certainly this process hasn't evolved over, weeks, months, but it's been more years and decades, really, that it's been talked about and known as to what the intention of this site was. And certainly this commission, going back to, as it's been outlined here in the material, March, then in September, we spent an awfully long time here, close to the midnight hour, going over this process. And then and at that time, it should be pointed out, and this is I would say a compliment to our chairperson, that at the September meeting, it was voted at that time to go to the HPC. However, after the intervening meetings after September, it was decided to bring this petition back to the Plan Commission because it was felt that there were still unresolved issues. And that was out of deference to the neighbors. It was out of deference to the input that we received. And so back at it again, we were in November, going through this process and refining it yet again with the input and patience of the developers, as well as the neighbors, to get it to the point where we are here now in December, certainly 6 months after we've actively discussed this project, I think, as a board. And I just lay that out as the foundation to make sure that everybody knows how much thought has gone into it, as Commissioner Freeman said, not only from the neighbor's perspective, but from the developer's perspective, and certainly, I think, and not to pat ourselves on the back, but from the Plan Commission ourselves, just the time, energy, and effort that has gone into discussing this and trying to refine this process. Thank you.
Thank you. Other commissioners?
I'll just make a few comments. I like the way this development proposal has evolved. In the last two meetings in September and November, there were a variety of open issues, and I think virtually all of them have been addressed. The traffic study, I raised that in the last meeting, and that was reviewed and considered and is now done. The green space is still, the open space is still there, and I've had a conversation with staff, educating myself on the history of this area, and I can appreciate why it's there and why it's important, and that's a plus. The drainage, is being worked on, which was an open issue with the adjoining neighbors or adjacent neighbors. The driveway, which was at one point onto Westminster, has been relocated onto the alley, so I consider that issue done. The view from the front is more residential, which works from my perspective, and the overall bulk is down, which is much more acceptable. So, those are my thoughts.
Commissioner Douglas?
Yeah, I'll be very brief so as not to repeat anything here, but I think overall, through the process, the petitioner has been extremely responsive to our input, and especially since the last meeting. I think, the massing is definitely much better. There are obviously a lot of details to work out, and I think we've consciously tried, to be the plan commission and to leave architectural issues to the HPC. But I think at this point, the HPC is best equipped to help the petitioner with those remaining details, and Peter made reference to the fact that there are, still a lot of things to work out. So bottom line is I do agree with staff's findings as detailed in their very thorough report, and I also agree with the recommendation.
Thank you. Commissioner Ruggles?
I'll also keep it brief. I think Commissioner Douglas stated it well, that this really needs to go back to HPC to help with the architectural examination of it. I would say that if the style would change to something like a Georgian, I understand why they went with more the French thing because of the dormers. It definitely keeps the scale down of the building, so you need to be mindful not to just ask for a style and then end up with a 3-story bulk the whole way along that corridor. So, but I do commend the petitioners for sticking with it, and I think the plan is improved and it'll be beneficial for the public.
Well, thank you. It sounds like consensus after many meetings. I will be brief also, but I want to highlight some of the key goals we had for this development, to bring more residential housing into the retail core, to give some additional parking to the library, to provide open space that was accessible to the public, to improve the walkability, which I think having the one main road and the sidewalks does. With input from the fire chief, this alleyway that used to go through as a shortcut to the library was intentionally cut off so that it gives this residential neighborhood less traffic from other sources. I like this last iteration, and I appreciate the petitioner's openness to the comments of the public, and I appreciate the public's comments along the way, which have continually improved what we see is close to a final product here. For the neighbors on Westminster, it is a front yard. It is a gateway, if you will, for your street, to separate it from a more dense use, which would include not just these 3 proposed residential buildings, but also the core retail area of Lake Forest. And I believe that we've hit a lot of the key criteria that we were asked to look at. I appreciate the comments of some of those who haven't been here for the 4 years, and some of it rings in my memory as things that we raised earlier. So perhaps we have hit a number of the points of concern the public would have. And as I say, I think we've reached consensus. And I would welcome a motion.
I'll make a motion to conclude the commission's preliminary review and input on the proposed site plan for the 3rd phase of the McKinley Road redevelopment, with an indication that the Plan Commission finds that the conceptual plans presented today, December 11th of 2019, generally conform with the master plan. To be clear, by this motion, it's not intended to grant any entitlements or guarantees of an approval of the site plan, zoning entitlements, or the overall plan. as a result of the Commission's conceptual review to date. However, I would, by this motion, make the following 5 directions going forward. First, forward the plan, the development to the Historic Preservation Commission for their review of the design aspects of the building, the landscape, and hardscape, with our direction that HPC take note of the work and recommendations of this commission, with a particular focus on the following aspects, and these are all aspects that we've discussed here a number of times. First, appropriate articulation of the portion of the building that will serve as a visual terminus to the east-west road. Second, the overall massing, roof forms, and articulation to assure an appropriate transition from the larger, more intense uses to the west to the single-family homes to the north and east. Third, the driveway entrance ramp to assure that it properly, and then for this, the driveway entrance ramp to Phase 3, to assure that it is properly screened through positioning, masonry walls, and landscaping. Fourth, the landscape plan to assure green space and landscaping along the Westminster streetscape to provide a landscaped entry into the single-family neighborhoods to the north and east. Assure appropriate landscaping along the east side of the building and encourage cooperation with the 2 neighboring properties immediately to the east around removals of lower quality trees and vegetation, if appropriate, on the adjacent properties, and replanting with materials that will provide seasonal and year-round screening. Fifth, the location and screening of the air conditioners and any other outdoor mechanical equipment to assure they are visually and acoustically screened. And lastly, the exterior lighting plan to assure that any exterior lighting is limited to that necessary for the safety and security, and that all exterior lighting is directed downward and the source of the light screened from view. The second area of direction would be for continued cooperative efforts to underground the remaining overhead utility wires located off of but near the development site on the 333 Westminster site that we talked about. Third direction would be for the petitioners, based on the Plan Commission's indication of support for this site plan, to proceed with detailed preliminary engineering plans with specific attention to the drainage and grading plan to direct stormwater runoff away from the neighboring properties to the east. Fourth, direct the petitioners to proceed with the preparation of the tentative plan development plat for the overall site, the plat of vacation for the alley, easement documents as needed to establish public access to the roadways, sidewalk, and green space, an overall landscape plan, a construction, parking, and staging plan, and other documents that may be required prior to consideration of tentative approval. Lastly, it would direct staff, after the HPC has completed its review and the other documents have been prepared and reviewed by staff, to return this petition to the Plan Commission for formal action and a final recommendation to City Council.
Do I hear a second?
I'll make a second.
All those in favor of the motion as read by Commissioner Freeman, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed? The motion carries. Thank you all for your participation on this agenda item. We are going to take a short break before we begin agenda item 3, which is the public hearing on Route 60. And we are now continuing the December 11, 2019 Plan Commission meeting for the City of Lake Forest. And we are discussing the opening of a public hearing on the comprehensive plan update to the Route 60 entrance corridor chapter. Background information will be presented. City staff will make a presentation. No action is requested at this time. The January 8th Plan Commission meeting will be dedicated to the review, comment, and deliberation on this agenda item. So tonight, presenters will be city staff and the city's consultants, Scott Goldstein and Lee Brown of Teska Associates, Inc. At this time, I'd ask if any commission members have any conflicts of interest or ex parte contacts to address.
None.
After the presentation and any additional comment from staff, we will then have public testimony. So if any of you would like to speak, I suggest if you haven't already, please put your names on slips of paper and give them into Kathy Cerniak. All right, with that, I'm going to ask the city staff to please make some opening comments.
Thank you, Chairman Kerr, members of the commission. Earlier this year, you reviewed the update to the chapter of the comprehensive plan relating to the Waukegan Road Settler Square Business District. So this is the second step in that process. It's been a bit laborious, but I think the conversations that have occurred have been good. You did recommend approval of the Waukegan Road Settler Square chapter update to the City Council. The City Council did approve that, and now we're working on some implementations of some of those action steps. So this matter is now before you. The same process was followed. We appointed an ad hoc working group, but unlike the Waukegan Road Settler Square process, we did engage Teska Associates to assist us, to really provide an independent view in gathering information, to give us new ideas. So they have been an active participant in really leading this process. Just a reminder on what is a comprehensive plan. A comprehensive plan is not zoning. It really sets a high level, a vision, identifies action steps, identifies desired outcome, and really is a chance for us as a community to step back and really think through whether or not the comprehensive plan, most of which was adopted in 1998, although the Route 60 chapter is more recent, but really to take a step back and look at where we've come from and think through where we're going. Lake Forest has always been willing to take some bold steps, and hopefully through this process we'll set the stage for doing that again. Thank you to everyone who sat through the earlier agenda items. I do promise you that at the January meeting, this item will be first. So I'll just say that to start. This is really the very beginning of your discussion. Scott Goldstein is going to overview the process to date, give you a summary of the information they heard as our consultants, give you some information on market analysis. We're not really going to get into talking about the specific recommendations tonight. We're going to move into that in January. But we did want to move this forward, even though the hour's a bit late. You all know that Jason Smith, who was a petitioner that was before you a number of months ago, he's waited patiently. He's actively participated in this process, and we really do want to, out of deference to him, keep this moving. And then the final thing I'll say is that we don't expect a significant amount of commission discussion or deliberation. Certainly public comments are welcome, but public comments will also be welcome in January. This is the beginning of the process, not the end. And I would certainly welcome any public comments between now and the next meeting by email or by letter if there's things that you want to make sure we think about and the commission thinks about. So don't feel that this is your only chance to talk or your last chance to talk. With that, I'd ask Scott to give us his presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. So as Kathy mentioned, we're going to take you through, and we've heard through the process, we've covered the material, market analysis, and then identified the sites of the plan. The next meeting, we'll go through the recommendations of the plan. Although you have the plan, so if you have questions, well, you can certainly take those tonight. The study area is between the tollway and the viaduct, the UP viaduct, on both sides of Route 60, going up all the way to the municipal center north, down to Amberley Woods to the south of Route 60. And it is one of the key gateways into Lake Forest, full interchange, of course, at I-94, which makes it which makes it a major entry into the city. As Kathy mentioned, it's been some time. The Route 60 chapter was completed and adopted in 2001. And there's major portions of that plan have in fact been implemented. Conway Park, Amberley Woods, Stonebridge, Academy Woods. There were goals, policy directions, and a future land use map at that time. But it has been 18 years, and so we've started, we reviewed the progress that had taken place at the first of 4 working groups. Those were in August, in September. In July and September, there were 2 community meetings, and several people here tonight were at those meetings. And then there was a final session in November that made a recommendation to the Plan Commission. In addition, there were over 30 interviews along the way that included city council members, included property owners, businesses, residents of the various types. Institutions, there's major institutions, of course, in this area as well. Lake Forest Academy, Lake Forest College has a business school there. The Bears have a site, et cetera. So there's, it's a very vibrant area. At these meetings, we had various ways for people to provide input. This is just a couple boards from the first community meeting about community character and land use. We had boards on transportation as well and infrastructure. At the second community meeting, the recommendations were presented, and again, we asked for public comment, both at the meeting verbally as well as on the boards. And I'm going to summarize that input as well as the input from the interviews that we did throughout the process over the next several slides. And these are themes along with quotes from specific people that are taken in general that are reflective of the diversity of opinion that was expressed throughout the process. The first observation is to set a standard of excellence that defines a major entryway into Lake Forest. Much care has been put into this corridor over the years, very carefully planned development, and people want to make sure to continue the legacy of high-quality design in terms of really a Class A, world-class office park that's been built over this period of time in Conway Park, as well as the residential communities that have been developed on both sides of Route 60. The setback was very intentional, but different opinions in terms of whether people really recognize what the purpose of that setback is. Some people said you don't really know that you're in Lake Forest. You see these setbacks. People don't know if it's just undeveloped land or was intentional. People would like to see celebrating, making maybe more active through a trail and other visual amenities. They want to keep the legacy of the setback, but also want to see it explored for further improvement, landscaping, as well as looking at a particular site of development there in terms of are there trade-offs with open space in the setback to think a little bit more creatively in the future. Quality, well-designed development and amenities. So it's not just the buildings that need to be high quality, but you've set a very high standard for the amenities as well, both through private development and public investment. This is the recent bike and pedestrian bridge that was built to connect over to the west. And people would like to see quality design. People talked about the American Club or Market Square, but people also want to say this is a different area than downtown. So what is really appropriate for this area really is different. It's probably a more modern look than other parts in Lake Forest because of the business park there. But the other element that came up is to attract younger couples and families. And I'll talk about that in a little bit. People would like to see people moving back to Lake Forest, people who maybe grew up here, went to college, maybe live somewhere else, want to come back to Lake Forest, and are there places for people to
to come in and move, as well as attract high-quality employees to keep Conway Park strong. There are a number of open spaces, both private and public, open spaces through the corridor. Lake Forest Open Lands has a piece of land. The city has land, the residential developments, the stormwater facilities. And again, this is very important. And so there are a lot of thoughts about the importance of open space, and open space feel along this corridor is very important. Prioritize environmental sustainability and really setting a high standard, just like we talked about with the buildings. One of the things that people really talked about that came out, I think, as the strongest item in some of the work that we were doing in terms of getting input was the need for more restaurants. Right now, there are very few restaurants in the area, and so people feel like they need to leave Lake Forest in order to go out for a drink after work or get lunch, et cetera. There are a couple on Waukegan Road, and of course, there's several in the CBD, but that's too far. If you're leaving, if you're working in the middle of the day, you can't really drive 10, 15 minutes away, make it back. A lot of the office buildings do have high-quality cafeterias in there, but still, people want to have another place to go in addition to that and want to have different choices in the area. With the interchange there's an opportunity for restaurants not only to capture local demand, but to be successful by having access to people beyond Lake Forest. Ensuring Conway Park remains a globally competitive location. So this is a really key force. We all know that a number of offices in Lake County have been moving to downtown Chicago and other central cities. Conway Park is still very successful, and people want to make sure it remains very successful in the future. And that really means keeping up the appearances of it, but the amenities that employees expect is different. Those are different than they were 20 years ago. So when you think of the amenities that people want, they want to have the amenities of the trail system that they have, and when you go in Conway Park, you can see at lunchtime all the people walking along the sidewalks and the trails in that area. But there aren't a lot of amenities beyond that. And so people would like to see that. If we want to keep on attracting world-class office tenants, they're going to expect those to have those amenities for their workers. Cultural, recreation, and sports-related uses. Several people really were thinking big in terms of, wouldn't it be nice to have a home for Lake Forest Symphony to come back to Lake Forest? That would require private fundraising, but is that a possibility? Is there space for that in this area? What about a performing arts space or other amenities that people would like to see? Mentioned before, the Bears is located in this corridor. Are there other things that are sports-related, recreation-related that could make sense? And while the plan, as Kathy said, is not zoning, it's not regulatory, this is a long-term 20, 30-year picture. So this is really to enable that type of creativity rather than require those in this corridor. In terms of housing, and I alluded to this, the top issue that came out was really attracting the high quality of housing that would keep Lake Forest competitive and bring younger millennials and young families and couples back into Lake Forest to fuel the housing market. So not everybody's ready to buy a very large house in a single family lot. People would really like to see more developments like Helmscott Park that are attracting those younger folks, that in many ways these apartments might cost just as much as a mortgage for some houses, but people want to have the flexibility to try Lake Forest, live here for a couple of years before they buy that house. So this is about fueling the housing market again. There's other types of housing needed as well, but that was the type of housing that came up most in terms of both the market study as well as input of really attracting high quality housing that could support the growing market in the city. And then the pedestrian bicycle experience is very important. In addition to restaurants, the next most common comment has been to extend the trail system all the way west, and that's been planned for a number of years. But to make that happen, the bridge helps, but we will get into that more at the next meeting, but I could answer questions about that. But really planning a route on the north side of Route 60 that will get you all the way over across the tollway where it's already been improved. And so it's part of a regional system to get to all of the different forest preserves and amenities in the area. And then in terms of transportation, reducing congestion through managing development, identifying transportation improvements, and providing transit options. So there's already not only an expansion of metro service that the city and Conway Park both contributing to, but also this shuttle service you're probably aware of that gets the employees to their jobs, and that's been successful. So thinking of all these things together in terms of bike connections, in terms of transit, in terms of thinking long terms of parking needs. There may be a time 20 years from now when not everybody's parking their car there all day. Maybe the car comes, drops them off, it's driverless. We don't really know. The point is, can the city stay on top of the trends and have a plan that's flexible over the time, that if at some point you don't need all those parking spaces all day, could that parking lot become something else, an amenity in addition to the building, et cetera? So really thinking ahead into the future. Okay, so a little bit on the market area. So we looked at both the city as well as a larger market area from 137 on the north, Butterfield Road and Milwaukee Avenue on the west, and all the way down to Dundee. And that's quite a large market area, but that's the nature of corporate office park, is drawing from a pretty large area. So that's what we looked at. You know, Lake Forest does have a high median income of over $170,000, which is higher than market area. But I will note that the market area median income of $125,000 is about twice that of the region as a whole. So you're talking about a large, not only Lake Forest, but we're really looking at that larger market area is quite strong. But I did allude earlier to the fact that one of the concerns is that the lowest cohort of age this is the city, is actually the highest cohort nationally. And so that is that millennial age of 25 to 34, and you even see it all the way up to age 44. The light green on the left bars of each are the city, and the darker, I guess, blue would be the market area. And so that is a concern in terms of that fueling the housing market of kind of a lack of market buying the single-family homes. Is there a way to get that going again? And is Route 60 a location that could absorb some of that housing to attract people who are a little bit younger and they're looking for not their first place, but maybe their second or third place out of college? It doesn't really pick up to till age 45. And so that was what really came out from that market. Now, this is true in a lot of high-income suburbs around the Chicago area. You're not the only one like this, but it's a little bit more highlighted here than in other communities we've been working in. In terms of retail gaps, so this is just, you've probably seen these kinds of numbers. So a gap is the difference between demand and supply. So a positive number means that essentially people are leaving the area to do their shopping. And you see a big contrast between Lake Forest and the column on the left of having a gap of 300 million, but the market area actually has a surplus, meaning people are coming into the market area, of 2 billion. So it's not like people are not finding restaurants to go to and food to buy, et cetera, but they're having to leave Lake Forest to do that, while other people are coming into the market area. So the question is, what is the potential for attracting more of the right types of restaurants and retail that will be successful in Lake Forest? Now, we are going to be working with the city on the CBD area, so this is not in isolation. We're not looking at Route 60 in isolation here, but with the interchange there, with the large employer base, with the residents in that area, what is the appropriate mix for Route 60, as well as being to complement the demand for Waukegan Road. And so a lot of this is looking at clusters and what are the right things to fit together rather than just what the gap is, but just it's important to note the contrast there between the city and the market area. This slide takes a little bit to explain, but I think it'll make sense once you look at it. On essentially the information on the left of the slide is the north suburban market, which is primarily the North Cook near the lake and Lake County, which is the north suburban market, versus O'Hare, which is that area around O'Hare and kind of up 90. And it generally shows that there's been some weakening of the market in the north suburban market while the O'Hare market is getting stronger and stronger. How does this show that? So on the left, if you can see, the blue line is showing an increase in vacancy, when in O'Hare you can see that the vacancy rate is going down. And we know that because there have been a number of pharmaceuticals and other companies leaving the north suburban market. It's not a major concern, but it does show some softening of the market up here compared to O'Hare. If we had the downtown Chicago, it would be similar to O'Hare. That's getting stronger and stronger in downtown Chicago. On the other hand, the rent levels have not changed. So the rent levels in the north suburban market are just as high as the O'Hare market. The reason why so they're both about $32 a square foot. It could be higher than that, but this is averages. And so it does show that there's a number of other companies that are leaving the overall market, not out of Conway Park, but of nearby office parks. It does show the importance of the city staying on top of these. This is a comprehensive plan looking much longer term than a market slide, but it does mean how do we keep this competitive and not allow it to soften. But these are global forces that we're talking about that really can't be controlled by Lake Forest, but Lake Forest can be at the top of its market to make sure it has the right ingredients to keep Conway Park a successful office park. So that's the general overview. I do have the slides here, and I was just going to point out some of the sites that this process looked at here. This is the site that's been approved for a new hotel off of Field Drive, thank you. And so this is, so the front half of this approved as a hotel, the back half is approved as an office, but they would need to come back to get further approvals on that. This is the Meservey site and the Open Lands site number 2 here. Number 3 is the site that Kathy mentioned that is a current development proposal that you've seen before here on Saunders Road. There's also these large single-family lots. There's wetlands here near the tollway that has limited access because Saunders Road actually ends here with the parking lot. So to get here, you have to go all the way down and back. And so this wasn't originally defined, but as we looked at it more, we thought, let's have a long-term vision for this rather than wait for those proposals to take place. So we're going to talk about that more at the next meeting, but I just wanted to give you an overview of the sites that were part of the planning process. Are there any, or do we have questions now from the Plan Commission, or what is this next step?
Well, at this point, I think we would normally ask staff if they have any additional comments that they would want to add and then come back to you.
Okay.
Thank you, Chairman Kerr. I don't have much to add, only if there is, you've all had the draft document for a month. If there is additional information that you want or questions you want answered before the next meeting, it would be helpful to know that. Certainly if you have questions of clarifications, Scott can respond to those this evening. I would just take this opportunity to mention, if you did not receive a direct mailed notice of this meeting and you want to receive a direct mailed notice, let me know. The draft document is on the city's website. If we make updates to that, we will put it on the website again. And I really don't have anything else to add at this point. I think if you have questions, I'd turn to Scott for those and take it from there.
All right, thank you. Next portion is for questions and requests for clarification from commissioners to the petitioner or staff. Commissioner Moorhead.
So I have a few questions came to mind. The slide with the retail gaps, does that take into account online sales, or is that just brick and mortar retail?
You know, they do provide that. We don't use it because we're concerned about the accuracy of that number. Mm-hmm. So this is really focusing on the brick and mortar on this slide.
Okay. And then a question, the access between Route 60 and Everett Road, I'm not sure what road that is through Conway, but there is an access, I mean, you can physically drive down that. Is that not,
Conway Farms Drive?
thank you, is that not considered an arterial, or does the city not, I mean, I just drove it today, just to look at the neighborhood, but does the city not encourage that access, or how does that fit in?
It is certainly not a direct access. There's a reason why Conway Farms Drive is so circuitous, really to discourage cut-through traffic. When Conway Farms was being developed, there was real concern about it being a shortcut from Everett to the office park. So it is a public street. It does connect at both ends, but it's not considered the major thoroughfare.
Okay. And then, last question, on the information on the millennials, my humble experience, it's that the 2008 recession had about a 5-year pause on people migrating out of the city to the suburbs. And then the interest is living in the urban core and being able to walk or ride, in a high-density area. I'm just interested in your thoughts. Do you think that tide will turn as millennials get older and they start having school-age children?
It's hard to forecast. We do know that similar high-income suburbs closer to Chicago are starting to see people move there now. If you look at a Park Ridge or an Evanston, et cetera, you're starting to see those folks move to the suburbs. So, Lake Forest is a little further away, and people, there's been so many jobs in Chicago. But a lot of people say when they have the second kid, other things people might. I'm very active at Urban Land Institute, and they're focusing a lot on this issue. And the latest thing I saw is it's not an either or, it's an and but. Meaning some people, there might have been, in fact, a long-term shift to more urban areas, but there's also going to be a shift to those suburbs that are doing well, can attract those ages as well.
Okay. Thank you. That's all.
Commissioner Freeman.
I would just ask that you circulate a copy of the deck so we can think through some of those issues in advance of the January meeting, please. Thanks, Kathy.
I will do that. We'll also put this presentation on the website.
Commissioner Ruggles?
I have no questions.
Commissioner Douglas?
No questions.
Commissioner Dixon?
No questions.
Well, I have one question for the petitioner, because I was fortunate enough to listen to all the input at the 2 meetings you had out the Municipal Services Building, and what struck a chord was how vitally important Conway Park, Office Park, is to the city of Lake Forest, and I'd ask if you could please comment on that yourself.
Well, absolutely. Not just the tax base, but in terms of land use, in terms of the high quality of development, the number of people that are coming into Lake Forest on a daily basis, but they're coming in, they're going to their jobs, and then they're getting right back on the tollway and going home. And so I think we heard a lot of input, not just by what people would like to see, but from some of those businesses and from the association, that they would like to see those amenities. As you know, they were very much in favor of the hotel being developed and asked for more meeting space, conference space to be built as part of the hotel. Right now, those businesses have to often leave Lake Forest to find that space if they're having a large meeting. And they not only think that the new hotel is going to be important, but they also have asked for additional meeting space even beyond that. And so it is very important to the city, agree with you. We heard a lot of input on that, but also they want to be a partner with the city. And that's true with the other institutions in the area. The Lake Forest Academy was on the working group, very supportive, came to all the meetings and really wanted to work with the residents in the area as well as Conway Park and Conway Farms. So there's a nice spirit there of cooperation that is something really that's a model for this area.
Thank you. Now we come to the public testimony portion. Given the lateness of the hour, I would ask each speaker not to exceed 5 minutes. And if your statement includes comments from other speakers, you can simply note that you do agree with the prior comments. Do you have any other names over there? Well, I know Arthur Miller would like to speak.
Arthur Miller, 169 Wildwood Road, and it's been recognized that I don't attend all your meetings, but I did attend meetings when the parcel that Mr. Smith is interested in was discussed earlier for Whole Foods. And one subject that came up, and I think is probably even more important now than it would have been earlier because of all the rain and everything, is that the drainage through there. Now, I know you guys don't do that, but there may have to be some kinds of planning as you densify further into this area, down into the downstream into the Conway Park area. There was quite a bit of gnashing of teeth and pulling of hair going on about the ponds being not really totally accurate for the adequate for the kind of precipitation that there is today. So I'm not a drainage person. I've dealt with it on my own property, but I mean, I think something major needs to be done before more density is, there needs to be some kind of basic study before more density is really contemplated to see about how to handle that runoff and channel it through. I mean, it'd be wonderful to sell it to California, but I don't know how practical that is. But keeping in mind that that is an issue, that as we make more and more development, that gets more of a problem. I mean, these are post-glacial lake sandbar moraines that go through, and then so there's these swales where all the water goes south. And so I think just keeping that in mind as an issue and how that's going to be dealt with in any comprehensive plan that goes forward, you've got to take that into account. Thank you.
Thank you. Wayne Urbanek.
Good evening. My name is Wayne Urbanek, 2025 Amberley Court. We're in the green box, not on the far right, but right below number 3 there. So thank you, commissioners and Kathy, for hosting tonight. I am a resident who does live inside the Route 60 corridor, and this proposal will directly impact me. I firmly endorse the development of box number 3 for high-quality development. However, within that development there is a mansion that is designated as a landmark. It's the old Blythe Mansion, which now everybody refers to as the Swanson Mansion. But that property also contains a high density of mature trees. And of course, the city of Lake Forest is the city of trees. But with the latest proposal I've seen by a commercial development is to clear cut that whole property. So I would really like you to take into consideration that this is the city of Lake Forest, and clear cutting really is not supposed to be within our nature of what we do here. Also within the proposal or from the consultants, they're talking about putting in a possible cul-de-sac, which I would highly recommend on Amberley Court, which is a private road that runs from Conway over to Saunders. And Commissioner Moorhead, you said you were down Conway. Well, we do get a lot of cut-through traffic every day. We get a lot of FedEx trucks, commercial trucks. We get the commercial people who work in that pink building area right there along the tollway, and they cut through our property every day, every morning and every evening. So with the proposal that's talking about putting in a cul-de-sac, and we do highly recommend that a cul-de-sac be put in at the end of Amberley Court. However, with the proposal for commercial development for number 3, is that the homeowners will be directly impacted by the commercial development. So we do encourage a high density berm with landscaping, because that is going to impact the homeowners in lots 24, 25, 26. And last but not least, I was not part of the consultant. I was never contacted by the consultant. I've lived on the property for over 3 years, so I certainly would like to have been part of the study, and I would welcome if he wants to reach out to me and be part of any future, conversations on this. Thank you.
Thank you. And I would just note, I believe the city has a mailing list for all those who've expressed interest in Route 60.
And if you did not, please let me know. I'll make sure you get on the mailing list. And I will add that if you are interested in talking directly with the consultant, please let me know and I'll put you in contact. If you have questions or comments that you want us to look at between now and the next meeting, also would welcome receiving those by email. Sorry.
Thank you. Keith Krebs.
Good evening, Commissioners and Kathy. I agree with much of what Wayne Urbanek had to say. I guess my only comment I would add is that as we talk about high-end rentals, that they appear to be successful in suburban areas where there is good walkability. We've heard that 3 or 4 times this evening. And I don't think that, Area 4 or Area 3 even, or Area 5 on the map here aren't going to have good walkability to a grocery store or a drugstore or a significant number of restaurants or a train station, like Highland Park and like the McKinley Road projects that we've talked about. So I just think we got to watch out. It could seem like a good idea to put a high-end rental in, but if the amenities and the walkability aren't there, the only way to keep that occupancy up will be to drop rental rates, and we could end up with an eyesore on our western gateway to Lake Forest.
Thank you. And Greg Ewert.
Hi, thanks. My name's Greg Ewert. We actually live at 225 Saunders Road, so we are a 5-acre parcel just immediately to the south of Area 5 there. So we butt up right against Area 5. Kathy knows us well. We've been coming to these for a very long time. And just a couple of kind of random requests. I'll have better prepared comments at the next meeting. So we've been coming for many, many years about, Parcel 3 and 20 years of history. It's some of this kind of interesting. 20 years ago, the Millers owned that property, then it got developed, or they tried to develop, right? I think everybody knows that story on what happened. But it was interesting, that original plan was for 20 houses. There was a certain commissioner sat where you guys are sitting who didn't like that. And I'll use his words. He was worried about 20 soccer moms and the impact that would have on the city. That whole development, it took a long time. Nothing ever happened. It moved forward even to looking into other type of housing, row houses and stuff. So when Whole Foods looked in there, that person who's sitting where you guys are was on the city council. And I called him right before the vote, and I said, are you going to vote for Whole Foods? He didn't answer me. And I said, are you going to vote for Whole Foods? Because just remember the comment that you made to me that there was 20, soccer moms that you were worried about. George Pantaleone is now mayor of the city, and George Pantaleone voted present when it came to Whole Foods. So it's interesting now, and I said to him that night, I go, Whole Foods probably has more than 20 employees at any one time. They probably have almost 40 employees in there. And the worry was back in the 2000s was over, a small number of employees. So it's just interesting historically to look where we've gone, where it was, what the concerns were. And then, as we all know, if you've been watching that parcel at all, when Whole Foods wanted to go in there, tearing down the property, the amount of houses that would go in, parking lots that would go in, parking spots, and then all the outbuildings too was always a big concern too. So I know moving forward, reading this document, having the setbacks, lessened is one of the things that's mentioned in here. I would also agree with the concern that it's not a very walkable area. I mean, if you've been out there, it's a 4-lane highway, right? And it's high-speed traffic. Whole Foods was going to have an outdoor cafe. I mean, seriously, who's going to sit outside there and have a drink on a place like that? So I think those are the things we need to be concerned about. I just mentioned, the comment came up about restaurants. I don't do urban planning. I don't know restaurants. But I think, Libertyville is a pretty good example, just watching what's happened. They opened up their stores at night. They did some other things. And that downtown area in Libertyville has really boomed now. It's really become popular because there's other things to do there, too. I mean, downtown Lake Forest, or whether it's Waukegan Road, or whether it's that intersection, there has to be other things to get the restaurants there. I would also mention then, too, my final comment. So when the Whole Foods was going in there, there was letters that are in the public documents that we have that the CEO of Abbott was against Whole Foods because he was worried about traffic. There were some other CEOs that I know it's in the public documents that were also worried about Whole Foods going in there and what it would do to traffic. So I think we just need to keep an open ear and open eye to what other people thought and not just have this kind of blindsided when we look into this. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other folks who would like to speak? And I do need to swear you in.
I'll tell the truth. I'm Greg Amarantos. I just moved into Elderberry Court in Stonebridge. I've been a resident of Lake Forest for 26 years.
Okay,
And,
Greg, do you
I mean-
solemnly declare and affirm that the testimony you're about to give or have previously given is true and correct to the best of your knowledge?
Absolutely.
Thank you. Please.
I've been coming to Lake Forest for 40 years because that's how long I've been married, and my wife is from the area. So as far as a historical perspective, I go back quite a ways. I'm not going to rehash any of that. The thing that just struck me was about the traffic, and I would respectfully disagree. I seem to recall that the big problem with McDonald's, and we ended up spending about $250,000 because there was going to be too much traffic when McDonald's was going up on Waukegan Road. I don't think that ever came to pass. McDonald's is gone, and now we have a bank there. At the same time McDonald's came about, St. Patrick's School, I believe that's St. Patrick's over there to the east, I'm not exactly sure the name of it. Anyway, at the same time, the school decided to put a big expansion on there. The interesting thing was, nobody worried about all of the school traffic from all the parents dropping off their children. And I can assure you, there were a lot more parents dropping off their children between 7 and 8, or picking them up between 2 and 3, than there ever was McDonald's traffic. So I would respectfully disagree that there would be a problem with traffic on Route 60 and leading into that area around Saunders. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Then that will close the public testimony portion. I would ask if the consultants or staff would like to respond to any of the issues raised by the public tonight, or to await the January meeting.
I don't have anything to add at this point. Good comments. We'll continue to, I would suggest that we'll talk. I don't know if out of this discussion and those comments we want to make any tweaks to the document, but we may. So we will get that out to you, and we will update what's on the website, and we will send you all notices. But the date of the January meeting is Wednesday, January 8th.
Thank you. Then, do any of the commissioners wish to make brief comments tonight, anticipating a longer discussion in January?
I would just add that, and encourage any of the neighbors that are here, any of the neighbors watching, if you don't have any of the materials, please reach out to Kathy Ciernek, and either at tonight's meeting or via email, and Kathy would be happy to disseminate that information. I know that was stated, but it can't go without being said. There's been some confusion in the past, but there's certainly, it's not intentional missing anybody, but please reach out if you're looking for that information.
All right. Well, no specific commission action is requested tonight.
I would ask, you did open the public hearing. I would ask that you make a motion to continue your discussion. All the comments that were made tonight will be incorporated into the record. So this is really an ongoing discussion.
Okay, well, I would entertain a motion.
So moved.
So the motion on the table is to continue discussion from tonight to the January 2020 meeting of the Plan Commission. All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? The motion carries. Thank you. Now, we have one short agenda item for members of the commission, approving our meeting calendar for 2020. And I believe everyone has given comments into Kathy. And we have been able to accommodate one request for a change from the May 13 date to May 12. That's a Tuesday evening. Are there any comments, conflicts, concerns from the commissioners?
No.
So the May meeting's on the 12th and not the 13th? I'm trying to find the calendar.
Right. And the November meeting was changed due to Veterans Day.
No comment. That's fine.
Okay. Then, all those in favor of approving the Plan Commission meeting scheduled for 2020, shown on the draft, updated December 6, 2019, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion carries. And any other public agenda items, any issues the public would like to address this evening? Seeing none,
Motion to adjourn?
Second.
the meeting is adjourned. Thank you.
I wish you all Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays.
Thanks
Thank you
to
for
you
all
too.
of your effort.
Kathy.
It's been you've accomplished a lot this year.